What remains when the noise fades? When the applause stops? When the meetings end? When the titles engraved on doors lose their shine? What is left? Before we continue with this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like the video. Oh, and don't forget to comment below where you're watching us from. We love to know that. Richard Bennett, at 68, often found himself asking that question in the quiet hours before dawn. He would wake early, not because sleep had abandoned him entirely, but because silence had grown louder with age. His penthouse overlooked the restless city below, glass towers that glimmered like promises he once believed mattered. Yet, staring at them now, he often wondered if he had been chasing shadows. Richard was a man of immense fortune. His name appeared in magazines, his speeches quoted in business journals. But when the city lights dimmed, when the echo of his footsteps followed him through hallways lined with art he barely looked at, what truly kept him company was memory. The memory of laughter that once filled a simpler home. The memory of a woman's eyes that had once looked at him not for his wealth, not for his position, but for the boy he had been before all this. Her name had been buried in the corners of his mind, too painful to revisit. Yet some mornings it rose uninvited, like the faint scent of flowers long gone. Laura Castillo. Richard shook the thought away, as he always did. He poured his coffee, black as usual, and sat by the wide window. The city below was already awake, rushing into another day of ambitions. He, too, had a schedule ahead. Board meetings, negotiations, responsibilities that had defined him for decades. And yet, as he stirred the cup absent-mindedly, he whispered to himself, "Is this all that remains?" The walls, though adorned with luxury, gave no answer. Silence pressed in, heavy and unrelenting. Later that morning, Richard's driver took him to the Bennett Corporation headquarters. The boardroom was a temple of glass and polished wood, filled with men and women who carried themselves with confidence, ambition, and just the right amount of fear of the man at the head of the table. Richard commanded respect. His voice, though softer with age, carried the weight of authority. But even as charts were projected, profits discussed, and strategies laid out, a part of him drifted. His eyes lingered on the sunlight filtering through the tall windows, dust particles dancing like tiny reminders of fragility. Time was slipping through his fingers, and though no one else in the room noticed, Richard felt it acutely. What good was power, he thought, if one had no one left to share it with? That evening, back in his penthouse, Richard sat in the leather chair that faced the skyline. He had everything, yet the silence mocked him again. The phone on the desk rang suddenly, cutting through the stillness. He frowned. His personal number was closely guarded. "Bennett," he answered, voice steady, though inwardly annoyed at the intrusion. The voice on the other end was small, fragile, desperate. "Daddy? Please, I need help." Richard froze. It was the trembling voice of a young girl, no older than 10 or 11. For a moment, he thought it must be a mistake, a wrong number. But there was something in her tone, raw fear, a kind of truth that cannot be faked. "My mom. She fainted. We haven't eaten since yesterday. My brothers are crying. Please, please, I didn't know who else to call. She said if things got bad, I should call this number and ask for you." Richard's heart, so used to contracts and calculations, stumbled. His fingers tightened around the phone. He tried to find words, but the weight of her plea pinned him in silence. "Your mother's name," he finally whispered, almost afraid of the answer. "What is her name?" The girl sniffled, her voice breaking. Laura Castillo." The coffee cup slipped from his hand, shattering against the marble floor. And in that instant, the silence of his life ended. Life often hides turning points inside ordinary days. We wake thinking we know what awaits us, a meeting, a task, a routine. But sometimes fate interrupts with a single unexpected voice, A fragile call that rearranges everything we thought was certain. Richard Bennett did not know it yet, but this call was not a mistake. It was the beginning of the only story that would truly matter. Isn't it strange how time works? We spend years chasing what we believe is important, only to discover that a single voice, a single memory, can awaken what truly lasts. For in the end, what remains is not the empire we built, but the hearts we once touched, and those that still reach for us when all seems lost. Richard Bennett remained frozen, the phone pressed against his ear, as if time itself had stopped. The voice of the young girl echoed through him, trembling, desperate, and heartbreakingly real. "Laura Castillo," he repeated under his breath, almost not daring to believe it. "Yes," the girl whispered. "She's my mom. Please, she's not waking up. I don't know what to do." The sound of a child crying faintly in the background tightened his chest. Richard had negotiated billion-dollar contracts, faced crises that shook the foundations of his company, and yet no moment in his life had ever shaken him like this. "What's your name, sweetheart?" he asked gently, his voice softer now. "Sophie," she said, choking on the word. "I'm 10. My brothers, Ethan and Noah. They're only 6. I tried to give them water, but they're hungry. Mom told me once, a long time ago, if anything really bad happened, I should call this number. She told me to say you were my dad." The last word pierced him. Dad. A title he had never been given, not once in his 68 years. He stood quickly, heart pounding as he reached for his jacket. "Listen to me, Sophie. Don't be afraid. I'm coming right now. Tell me your address." She hesitated. "Will you really come? You sound like you don't even know me." Richard swallowed hard, forcing back the wave of emotions threatening to crack his voice. "I promise you, Sophie, I will be there. Just tell me where you are." Within minutes, Richard was in the back seat of his car, his driver startled by the urgency in his command. The city blurred past the windows, streets filled with people unaware that a lifetime was unraveling inside the man they called powerful. As they drove, memories came unbidden, Laura's laughter under summer skies, the way she used to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear when she was nervous. The last night he saw her, when she had vanished without explanation, he had searched, asked, even pleaded with his father for answers, but all he was told was to forget her and focus on his future. And now, a decade later, a child with her voice had called him Dad. The car turned into a narrow street, lined with crumbling buildings, far from the polished avenues Richard normally inhabited. He told the driver to stop and stepped out, his polished shoes crunching against gravel. The air smelled faintly of damp concrete and rain-soaked laundry. Sophie was waiting at the entrance of a worn-out apartment building. She was small, her hair messy, her eyes wide with fear and hope all at once. 2 little boys clung to her hands. "Are you him?" she asked cautiously. Richard bent down, looking at her as though she were made of something sacred. His voice trembled despite himself. "Yes, Sophie. I'm Richard, and I'm here now." The boys peeked at him shyly, their faces thin, their clothes worn. He saw hunger in their eyes and exhaustion far too heavy for children. "Where's your mom?" he asked. Sophie led him up the dim staircase, her tiny fingers clutching his sleeve. Inside the small apartment, Richard saw a sight that broke him. Laura, pale and weak, lying unconscious on a threadbare couch. "Laura!" His voice cracked, the name escaping like a prayer. He rushed to her side, kneeling, gently touching her hand. It was cold, fragile. For a moment, the strong, commanding man the world knew was gone. In his place was simply Richard, the young man who had once loved her beyond reason. Her eyelids fluttered, a faint whisper escaping her lips. "Richard." He leaned close, his throat tight. "Yes, Laura. It's me. I'm here." The children watched silently, sensing the gravity of the moment. Richard's eyes met Sophie's, and in that instant, something irreversible shifted. She wasn't just a child in need. She was his child. He called for a doctor immediately, arranging everything with a swiftness that came from years of command. But this time it wasn't business, it was desperation. He carried Laura to the car himself, ignoring the curious stares of neighbors. The children followed, holding on to each other, clinging to the hope that perhaps their world was about to change. As the car drove away, Richard looked at the three young faces staring back at him. Sophie's eyes shone with cautious trust, Ethan and Noah's with quiet fear. For the first time in decades, Richard felt the weight of something greater than wealth or power pressing upon his shoulders. Responsibility, love, fatherhood. He held Laura's hand tightly, whispering words she could not hear. "You should never have faced this alone." Life often surprises us, not with grand victories, but with fragile voices asking for help. Sometimes, the call we least expect is the one that reveals who we truly are. For Richard, the phone that once rang with business deals had now delivered the most important message of all. It was time to stop living for his empire and start living for love. The hospital room was dimly lit, the steady beep of machines filling the silence. Richard sat at Laura's bedside, his hand still wrapped around hers, unwilling to let go. Sophie curled up in the corner chair, her brothers asleep against her. Exhaustion clung to all of them like a heavy blanket. Laura's breathing steadied as the IV dripped rhythmically. The doctor had explained it simply: malnutrition, exhaustion, stress. She needed rest, food and care, things that should never have been luxuries, but for Laura and her children had become rare blessings. Richard studied her face. The years had left gentle lines where laughter once danced, and shadows under her eyes told stories of nights spent worrying, working, surviving. Yet beneath it all, she was still the woman he remembered. The same warmth, the same quiet strength, and the same ache stirred in his chest, sharper now because of all the years lost. When Laura finally stirred, her eyes fluttering open, it was Sophie who rushed first to her side. "Mom!" she whispered, relief flooding her voice. "You're awake." Laura smiled faintly, brushing her daughter's cheek. "You did well, sweetheart." Her gaze then shifted, landing on Richard. She froze. For a long moment, they simply stared at each other, the past colliding with the present in a silence too heavy for words. "Richard," she breathed, as though saying his name made the memory real. "It's me," he said softly. "I'm here now." Her lips trembled. "You shouldn't be." The children exchanged glances, sensing something unspoken in the air. Richard gestured gently, asking Sophie to take her brothers out into the hall for a moment. She obeyed reluctantly, her eyes never leaving her mother. When the door closed, Richard leaned closer, his voice low but urgent. "Why, Laura? Why did you disappear? I searched for you. I never stopped wondering." Tears welled in her eyes, and she turned her face away. "You weren't meant to know. I was told to stay away, for your sake, and mine." "By who?" Richard pressed. "Tell me the truth." Her voice cracked. "Your father's men. One of them came to me the night I found out I was pregnant. He said if I ever tried to reach you, they would ruin me. They would destroy everything. I was terrified, Richard. I believed him. I had no choice." The words hit him like a blow. His father, the man he had idolized, feared and obeyed. Even in death, his shadow still reached into Richard's life. "You carried this alone," Richard whispered, anger and sorrow mingling in his chest. "All these years, and Sophie, she's yours," Laura said, finally looking into his eyes. "I told her only in whispers, only once, when she asked why she didn't look like Michael. He raised her as his own, loved her as if she were his blood. I wanted to protect her, to protect all of them. Richard's vision blurred. The truth, long buried, stood before him now. He had a daughter, flesh of his flesh, blood of his blood, and he had missed her entire childhood. The door opened quietly, and Sophie peeked back in, holding her brother's hands. "Mum, are you okay?" Laura wiped her eyes quickly, nodding. "Yes, my love, come here." The children climbed onto the bed carefully, huddling close. Richard watched them, his heart breaking and healing at the same time. Sophie looked at him, her gaze steady despite her youth. "You know my mom, don't you?" Richard's throat tightened. He nodded slowly. "Yes, Sophie. A long time ago I knew her very well." "And are you really my dad?" The question was fragile, hanging in the air like glass about to shatter. Richard glanced at Laura, who gave him a tearful, silent nod. He turned back to Sophie, his voice firm but tender. "Yes, Sophie, I am." The little girl studied him, as if trying to fit the word father onto his unfamiliar face. Then, without warning, she crawled off the bed and into his arms. For Richard, the moment was almost unbearable in its beauty. The child he never knew, the years stolen, the second chance he never expected, all wrapped in the fragile weight of her embrace. That night, as the children finally slept, Richard sat by the window, staring into the darkness beyond the glass. His mind swirled with questions, regrets, and a burning resolve. Laura had been forced to disappear. Sophie was his daughter. The twins had lost the only father they knew, and he, Richard Bennett, had been blind to it all. But not anymore. The past had stolen enough. He would not let the future do the same. There are names that never leave us, no matter how many years pass. They wait in silence, like echoes in our hearts, ready to return when we least expect them. And when they do, we are reminded that time can take much, but it cannot erase the truth of love once lived. The next morning, after the doctors assured him Laura was stable, Richard insisted on visiting the place where she and the children had been living. He needed to see it with his own eyes, not because he doubted Sophie's words, but because he couldn't comprehend how Laura, the woman he had once dreamed of building a life with, had been reduced to such hardship. The taxi ride there was quiet. Richard had chosen not to take his black company car this time. He didn't want polished leather seats or tinted windows separating him from the truth. Sophie guided him through streets she knew too well, her small hand gripping his as though afraid he might vanish if she let go. When they arrived, Richard felt his chest tighten. The building stood like a weary soldier, its paint peeling, its windows cracked, its hallways carrying the faint smell of dampness and stale smoke. It was a place where survival whispered louder than hope. "Here," Sophie said softly, pointing to a door with chipped numbers barely hanging on. Inside, the apartment was dim, its furniture mismatched and worn. A couch sagged under the weight of years, a table bore the scars of restless hands, and the air smelled faintly of boiled rice and laundry detergent. Yet everything was tidy, carefully kept by a woman who had tried to hold dignity even when life stripped her bare. Richard walked slowly, his eyes taking in the details. The children's drawings taped to the fridge, their stick figures smiling beneath a bright sun, the small shoes lined neatly by the door, the corner where a battered guitar leaned against the wall, its strings loose but not forgotten. He touched the guitar gently. "Laura still plays?" Sophie shrugged. "Sometimes when she's not too tired, she sings to us, mostly lullabies, but she cries after." Richard's throat tightened. He remembered Laura's voice, clear, warm, alive. The memory of her singing under starlit nights came rushing back. To imagine her now, singing through tears in this tiny apartment, was almost too much to bear. The twins, Ethan and Noah, bounded into the room, proudly showing him a box of worn-out toys, a plastic truck missing a wheel, a stuffed bear with one eye, puzzles with pieces long gone. Their joy in presenting them pierced him deeper than any business rival's betrayal ever could. "Do you like them?" Noah asked shyly. Richard knelt down, meeting their eyes. "I love them. Thank you for showing me." It was such a small exchange, yet in those innocent eyes he saw a world he had missed. They weren't his by blood, but they were Laura's, and that was enough to make them his by heart. Laura had returned from the hospital later that day, still fragile but insistent. "I want to be home," she had said. Home. If this crumbling apartment was all she could call home, then Richard knew he had failed her long before. She sat quietly on the couch, her hands folded in her lap. Richard studied her, his voice low. "How long have you been living like this?" "Since Michael passed," she admitted, eyes cast down. "The bills piled up. I took extra shifts, cleaned houses, did whatever I could. But it was never enough. Sometimes the kids ate first, and I managed." He could hear the shame in her voice, but more than that, the unbreakable strength. She had carried everything alone, while he had lived surrounded by luxury. "You should have called me," he whispered. "I couldn't," she replied quickly. "Not after what happened before. I didn't want to drag you into my misery or risk them taking Sophie away. I thought it was better if you kept your life and we kept ours." Richard shook his head, his jaw tight. "Laura, your suffering was never meant to be separate from mine. You and Sophie, Ethan and Noah, you are my life, whether I knew it or not." Her eyes filled with tears, but she said nothing. That evening, as the children fell asleep in the cramped bedroom they shared, Richard stood by the window, looking out at the flickering streetlight. The weight of what he had seen pressed against his chest. He realized wealth meant nothing if those he loved lived in shadows. And though Laura resisted pity, though pride kept her silent, Richard knew what he must do. He turned back to her, his voice steady. "This ends here, Laura. You don't have to fight alone anymore. Tomorrow, you and the children are coming with me." She looked at him, torn between fear and longing. "And if I say no?" "Then I will come back every day until you say yes," he replied. For a moment, silence filled the room, broken only by the sound of Sophie's breathing in sleep. Then Laura closed her eyes, tears slipping down her cheeks. She did not answer, but her silence spoke more than words. Sometimes the hardest thing is not admitting we are in need, but allowing others to see it. Pride can keep us in the dark, but love insists on shining a light. And when someone finally says, "You don't have to do this alone," it is not weakness to accept, it is grace. The black car glided through the city streets, far from the peeling paint and cracked windows of the old apartment. Sophie sat pressed against the glass, her eyes wide, watching as buildings grew taller, shinier, brighter. Beside her, the twins clutched their stuffed toys like anchors, their small faces a mix of awe and fear. Laura sat quietly, her hands folded tightly in her lap. She had wanted to refuse, to keep her pride intact, but Richard's persistence and the look in Sophie's eyes when she asked, "Can we, Mama?" had weakened her defenses. Now, as the car pulled into the underground garage of Richard's penthouse building, she felt both gratitude and dread. Gratitude for safety, dread for the unfamiliar. The elevator doors opened to reveal a world that seemed like something out of another life. Gleaming marble floors, soft golden lighting, a quiet that felt almost sacred. When the doors slid open on the top floor, the children gasped. The penthouse was enormous. Walls of glass revealed the city skyline, lights sparkling like fallen stars. The air smelled faintly of polished wood and roses from a vase near the entrance. Every surface seemed to shine. Is this all yours? Ethan whispered. Richard smiled gently. Ours now. Noah's little fingers trailed across a velvet chair, his eyes wide. It's like a castle. Sophie turned to Richard, almost shy. Do we really get to stay here? He knelt down to her height. Yes, Sophie, this is your home now. Yet Laura stood frozen at the doorway. Her eyes moved across the vast living room, the shelves filled with books, the framed photographs of Richard shaking hands with world leaders, the grand piano that sat untouched. It all felt too much, too far from the life she knew. She whispered almost to herself, "We don't belong here." Richard heard her. He walked to her side, his voice low but firm. "Laura, you belong here more than I do. This house was empty before. Now it finally feels alive." But she shook her head, doubt clouding her face. "And what will people say? That you rescued some poor widow, that you turned your penthouse into a charity case." Her words carried the sting of pride, but also the fear of judgment. Richard reached for her hand. "Let them say what they will. I don't care about appearances. I care about you." For the first time in years, Laura allowed herself to meet his eyes fully. She saw no pity there, only sincerity, and that scared her most of all. The first night was a mixture of wonder and discomfort. The children ran through the hallways, discovering rooms bigger than their entire apartment. They tested the softness of the beds, laughed at the endless supply of lights that switched on with a simple touch, and marveled at the bathtub that could hold them all at once. But bedtime was not easy. Noah whispered to Ethan, "What if we get lost in here?" Sophie confessed, "It feels like we're in someone else's dream." Laura tucked them in gently, singing a lullaby she had sung countless nights in the cramped apartment. The same melody, now echoing through a grand room, felt strange. She worried the children might forget where they came from, that comfort could erase resilience. Later, Richard found her standing on the balcony, arms wrapped around herself, staring at the city below. "Too quiet?" he asked softly. She nodded. "Too different?" He stepped closer, keeping a respectful distance. "Different doesn't have to mean wrong. It just means new, and sometimes new is exactly what we need." Laura let out a long sigh. "I don't know how to live in your world." "Then don't," Richard replied gently. "Bring your world into mine. This house needs your laughter, your music, your children's drawings on the fridge. Without them, it's only walls." His words sank deep, stirring something in her heart. Perhaps, she thought, this wasn't about stepping into his world. It was about building a new one together. That night, long after everyone had gone to bed, Richard wandered the quiet halls. He paused by the children's room, listening to their steady breathing. Then he stopped at the living room, where Laura had left her guitar against the wall. He imagined her playing again, filling the silence with song. For the first time in years, he felt his penthouse was not a fortress, but a home. Sometimes stepping into a new chapter feels like trespassing into someone else's story. But every home, no matter how grand or humble, only becomes real when love fills its walls. Change is frightening, but it is also the doorway to belonging. Happiness has a fragile sound. It comes like the rustle of leaves in the wind, gentle, fleeting, never certain. And just as quickly as it arrives, the world always finds a way to test it. For Laura, the days in Richard's penthouse felt like walking on borrowed ground. The children laughed more, slept better, and discovered joys she had never been able to give them. Warm meals waiting, soft blankets, books and toys filling their days. Yet, at night, she lay awake, her chest heavy. What if it all vanished tomorrow? The first whisper of trouble came at the grocery store. Laura had insisted on going herself, craving something normal, something that felt like her old life. She moved through the aisles, placing flour, milk, and apples in the cart. Small, ordinary things. Two women stopped near her. Their voices were low, but sharp enough to cut. "Did you hear? Richard Hale's taken in some woman and her kids." Tragic story, I suppose, but really, living in his penthouse, it reeks of charity, doesn't it? Laura's hands froze on the cart handle. The women never looked at her, but she knew. They were talking about her. By the time she returned to the penthouse, her smile was gone. Richard noticed immediately. "Something's wrong," he said, as she unpacked the groceries in silence. "It's nothing," she muttered. "Laura." His voice was steady, patient. She turned to him, her eyes flashing with pain. "They're already talking about us, about me. I don't belong in your world, Richard. People will never let me forget where I came from." Richard exhaled slowly, setting the bag in his hand on the counter. "Let them talk. They don't know our story." "But they think they do," Laura whispered. "And maybe they're right." The next blow came not from strangers, but from within Richard's own circle. A board meeting, tense and filled with polished suits, turned cold when Victoria Sterling, the sharp-eyed, ambitious member of the board, spoke. "Richard," she said sweetly, "your new domestic situation has raised some questions. Stability, responsibility, image. The press loves a scandal. And our investors, well, they worry." Richard's jaw tightened. "My family is not a scandal." Victoria tilted her head. "Family, you say? Forgive me, but wasn't this sudden? One day a bachelor CEO, the next day guardian of 3 children and a woman from the shadows of the city. It does raise eyebrows." He leaned forward, his voice quiet, but edged with steel. "What I do with my life outside these walls is mine alone. And if anyone believes my dedication to this company has weakened, they're wrong." But as the meeting ended, he felt the coldness of doubt hanging in the air. That evening, Richard returned home later than usual. The penthouse glowed with warmth. Laura and the children were baking cookies, laughter spilling from the kitchen. Sophie was covered in flour. Noah and Ethan were sneaking spoonfuls of dough. For a moment, he simply stood there, watching, letting the sound soak into him. Yet behind the sweetness of the scene, the words of Victoria Sterling lingered. Laura noticed his heavy expression. "Work trouble?" she asked gently. He forced a smile. "Nothing I can't handle." But Sophie, sharper than her years, tugged at his sleeve. "You look like you're carrying something too heavy, Mr. Richard." He knelt, meeting her earnest eyes. "Maybe I am, but you 3 helped me carry it." The girl nodded solemnly, as if she understood more than he wished she did. Later that night, as the children slept, Laura approached him on the balcony. "You're keeping something from me," she said softly. Richard hesitated, then admitted, "The board isn't happy. They think I'm distracted, that my life here, with you, makes me weaker." Laura's chest tightened. "And are they wrong?" Richard looked at her with quiet certainty. "They couldn't be more wrong. For the first time I feel like I'm fighting for something that matters." Tears welled in her eyes. "But what if this costs you everything?" He reached for her hand, holding it tightly. "Then everything wasn't worth having in the first place." That night, Laura lay awake, listening to the steady breathing of her children. Richard's words lingered in her heart, but so did the cruel whispers of strangers and the icy judgment of the board. The penthouse was warm, safe, full of laughter, but shadows had begun to creep in, threatening to undo the fragile peace they had found. Every joy carries with it the weight of fear. People will always whisper, always judge, but the measure of love is not found in the silence of approval. It is found in the courage to keep choosing each other, even when the world disapproves. Storms do not always come with thunder. Sometimes they arrive in silence, through words on paper, in whispers behind closed doors, in the tightening of the chest that warns of trouble ahead. For Richard and Laura, the storm came in an envelope. It was a grey morning when the letter arrived. Laura was pouring cereal for the twins when the concierge called up to the penthouse, saying a legal notice had been delivered. Richard opened the envelope at the table, his jaw hardening as he read. "What is it?" Laura asked, her voice tentative. He folded the papers, his movements sharp. "A petition. Someone filed a complaint questioning whether this is a safe environment for the children. Social services has been notified." The bowl slipped from Laura's hand, milk spilling across the counter. "What? Who would—" "Victoria Sterling," Richard said flatly. "She wants me discredited. If she can paint me as unstable, distracted, unfit, she gets her way at the board." Laura's knees weakened and she sank into a chair. "They'll take my children. They'll think I'm unfit." Richard knelt before her, gripping her hands. "No. Listen to me. They will not take them. We'll fight this, together." But fear spread quickly through the household. Sophie overheard fragments of the conversation. That night, she asked her mother in a trembling voice, "Are they going to take us away again, like when Daddy got sick?" Laura held her tightly, whispering, "No, my love. No one will take you away, not while I'm here." Yet inside, she wondered if promises were enough. The twins sensed it too. They clung to Richard whenever he left for work, begging him not to go. Ethan whispered once, "If you leave, the people might come." Richard's heart broke a little more each day. The official visit came 2 weeks later. A woman in a neat blazer arrived with a clipboard, polite but distant. She walked through the penthouse, noting every detail, the stocked fridge, the children's laughter echoing through the halls, the expensive toys scattered on the floor. "Impressive," she remarked, "but sudden transitions can be destabilizing. Children need consistency." Richard forced a calm smile. "Consistency is exactly what I want for them. Safety, love, stability. They have that here." The social worker nodded, scribbling notes. "We'll see." When the door closed behind her, Laura collapsed onto the couch, her hands shaking. "What if they don't believe us? What if they think I brought them into a dangerous situation?" Richard sat beside her, pulling her close. "Then I'll tell them the truth, that you've carried this family alone for years, that you've given everything, and that now it's my turn." Yet the tension began to seep between them. Nights, once filled with quiet conversations, turned into silence. Laura pulled away, ashamed of being seen as a burden. Richard grew restless, weighed down by the board's whispers and the legal battle. One evening, their voices finally collided. "You don't understand, Richard," Laura cried, her eyes shining with tears. "They don't see me as a mother. They see me as a mistake you made, one you're trying to fix with money." "That's not true," he snapped. "I've risked everything to protect you, to protect them. And in the process," she whispered, "you might lose everything you've built, and it'll be my fault." The words hung in the air like broken glass. Richard's chest tightened. "Laura, don't ever say that. This isn't about fault. It's about family." But she turned away, unable to meet his eyes. That night, Laura sat alone in the children's room, watching them sleep. Their small faces, so peaceful, seemed worlds away from the chaos surrounding them. She remembered the nights in the tiny apartment when all she had was her voice to sing them calm. She thought of David, her late husband, who had carried them on his shoulders even while illness gnawed at him. And she wondered, was she about to fail them now? Meanwhile, Richard stood on the balcony, staring at the skyline. For the first time in years, doubt gnawed at him. Could he really hold his empire together and protect this fragile new family, or was he chasing something destined to crumble under the weight of expectation? The city lights blinked in silence, offering no answers. Every family faces its breaking point, the moment when fear and love collide, when doubt whispers louder than hope. But sometimes it is in the breaking that love proves itself unshakable. Morning arrived with a quiet determination. The penthouse felt heavier than usual, weighed down by the tension of the previous weeks. Yet for Richard, indecision was no longer an option. He could no longer let fear of gossip or judgment dictate the lives of those he loved most. He stood in the living room watching Sophie and the twins eat breakfast. Their laughter was fragile, hesitant, but it existed. And that was enough to steel his resolve. "Laura," he said softly, turning to her, "we cannot wait. We have to face them now." Her hands trembled as she stirred her coffee. "And if we fail?" "Then we fail together," Richard replied, with quiet certainty. "But I will not let fear decide for us." Later that morning, the board convened in the polished conference room. Victoria Sterling, as expected, was poised and cold, ready to undermine him. The room was filled with men and women who measured power in contracts, balance sheets, and whispers. Richard entered, his steps calm, measured, but filled with quiet fire. He knew that this was no longer a business meeting, it was a declaration of what family truly meant. "Good morning," he began, his voice steady. "I understand there are concerns about my ability to manage both my responsibilities and my family. Let me be clear. I do not separate my life from my children. They are my priority, as is my work, and I refuse to be judged by those who do not understand the value of love and loyalty." Victoria's lips curved into a polite, mocking smile. "Richard, the board only seeks reassurance. Stability is crucial for our investors." "I understand," he said, meeting her gaze without flinching. "But stability is not built on appearances or whispered judgments. It is built on truth, commitment, and courage. If anyone doubts my dedication, I invite them to visit my home, meet my family, and witness what love and care truly look like." There was a silence in the room, heavy and expectant. Richard's words carried more weight than any report, more authority than any spreadsheet. For the first time, the room seemed unsure of itself. Meanwhile, at the penthouse, Laura found her own courage. She had spent nights worrying about appearances, about judgment, about the board's perception of her as a mother who had struggled. But she realized something powerful. She had survived. She had carried children through hunger, through sickness, through despair. And now she could speak. The social worker arrived that afternoon, clipboard in hand. Laura stood tall, letting the children hide behind her for support. Her voice, initially hesitant, grew stronger with each word. "I have done everything to protect my children," she said. "I have worked tirelessly to keep them fed, safe, and loved, and now they are in a place of stability, not because of fear, but because of hope. They have a father who loves them, and I have chosen to let them belong to both of us." The social worker looked at her, surprised by the dignity in her voice. She scribbled notes, nodded politely, but said nothing further. Laura exhaled slowly, letting the tension drain from her body. For the first time in weeks, she felt she had done the right thing. Richard returned home that evening to find Laura in the kitchen, Sophie and the twins laughing nearby. The air smelled of fresh bread and cinnamon. "You did it," he said quietly. Laura smiled, a genuine, tired but triumphant smile. "We did it, together." Sophie ran to him, wrapping her small arms around his legs. "You told them, didn't you? You told them we belong here?" Richard bent down, kissing her forehead. "I did, and we proved it, didn't we?" The children cheered softly, and Richard felt a warmth that no boardroom or skyscraper could ever provide. That night, as the city lights flickered in the distance, Richard and Laura sat on the balcony. The children slept soundly inside. "You were brave," Richard said softly, taking her hand. "So were you," Laura replied. "I didn't think I could do it, but love gives strength we didn't know we had." Richard looked at her, the woman who had survived so much, the mother who had carried an entire family on her shoulders. "We are stronger together, and nothing, not whispers, not threats, not the past, can take that away." She rested her head against his shoulder, listening to the quiet pulse of the city below. Courage is not the absence of fear, it is the choice to act despite it. Families are built not only in laughter, but in the moments we stand firm against doubt, against judgment, against the shadows of the past. True love shines brightest when tested, and in that light, resilience and hope are born. The morning sun streamed through the penthouse windows, painting the room in golden light. For the first time in weeks, the house felt fully alive, not just a home, but a sanctuary. The scent of fresh flowers mixed with the faint aroma of breakfast cooking, a melody of comfort and domesticity that Richard had longed for. The children ran about, laughing freely, no longer weighed down by the fear that had lingered in every corner of their former life. Sophie climbed onto the couch, hugging her stuffed bear tightly, while Ethan and Noah built towers of blocks that reached toward the ceiling. The walls echoed with innocent joy, a sound Richard had missed more than he could have imagined. Outside the penthouse, the legal battle reached its climax. Social services had completed their investigation. Victoria Sterling's complaints had been scrutinized, her accusations of instability dismissed. Richard's home, once a world of strangers and whispered judgment, was officially declared a safe and loving environment. The document in his hands felt heavier than any contract he had ever signed, not because of ink and paper, but because of what it represented: redemption, justice, and a future reclaimed. He called Laura to the living room. "It's done," he said, his voice trembling slightly. Laura stood there, a mixture of hope and fear in her eyes. "Done?" she asked. "Yes," he said, holding up the official papers. "They've ruled in our favor. You and the children are safe. We are a family recognized and protected." For a moment, silence filled the room. Then Sophie ran to her mother, tears spilling down her cheeks. "We did it, Mama. We're really safe." Ethan and Noah joined, and soon all four children were wrapped in a warm, unbreakable embrace. Laura held them tightly, her own tears flowing freely. Richard watched, feeling the weight of years lift from his chest. The house, the city, the world, it all felt brighter now. That afternoon, Laura finally found the courage to confront her own past fully. She opened the old photo album she had kept hidden, flipping through faded pictures of David, the husband she had lost too soon, and their first days together as a family. The memories brought both pain and gratitude. "I was so afraid to move forward," she whispered to Richard, "afraid it meant forgetting him, forgetting all we had. But I see now. Moving forward doesn't erase the past. It honors it." Richard sat beside her, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "And your past brought you here to us. Nothing is wasted in the life of love." The evening arrived, calm and gentle. Richard suggested a family walk on the terrace. The city stretched below, a tapestry of lights, noise, and life. Sophie ran ahead, her laughter carried by the wind. The twins followed, holding hands, their small footsteps echoing against the marble. Laura walked beside Richard, leaning slightly on him, savoring the quiet victory. "We made it," she murmured. Richard looked down at her, eyes filled with emotion. "Yes, we made it. Together." They reached the edge of the terrace where the skyline seemed endless. The children gathered around them, forming a circle of small hands and trusting eyes. Sophie whispered, "This is home, isn't it?" Richard smiled. "Yes, Sophie, this is home, and home is where love lives." Later that night, After the children slept, Laura and Richard sat on the balcony, the city lights twinkling like distant stars. For the first time in a long time, they were not haunted by shadows of doubt or whispers of the past. "I never thought it would feel like this," Laura said softly. "Safe, loved, whole." Richard took her hand. It took courage, and it took trust. And it took the hardest part, letting love lead, even when it scared us. Laura rested her head against his shoulder. "We're finally together, not just surviving, but really living." Richard kissed the top of her head, the warmth of their unity, a balm to years of pain and separation. Healing does not erase pain, nor does it erase the past, but it builds bridges between what was lost and what can be found. Family is more than blood. It is the courage to forgive, the strength to fight, and the willingness to love when the world doubts you. And in the quiet moments, when fear fades and love prevails, life reveals its most beautiful gift: togetherness. The morning sun rose slowly over the city, spilling gold across the penthouse. The air was filled with quiet energy, the kind of calm that follows a storm, where even the smallest sounds carry the weight of life's promise. Birds chirped in the distance, the wind whispered through the balcony doors, and somewhere below, the city hummed its endless rhythm. Richard stood by the window, watching Sophie, Ethan, and Noah laugh as they played with a ball on the terrace. Their joy was uncontainable, spilling across the marble floors and into the very walls of the penthouse. He breathed in the moment, letting it anchor him to the present. Laura emerged from the kitchen, carrying a tray with fresh bread, fruit, and tea. She placed it gently on the low table, smiling at the scene before her. For the first time in years, she felt at peace. "You were right," she said softly, brushing a strand of hair from her face. Love really can change everything." Richard turned to her, his eyes reflecting both relief and pride. "Not just love," he replied, "courage, hope, and the choice to keep moving forward, even when the past tries to hold us back." The children ran to her side, their small arms full of excitement. Sophie held up a drawing she had made, depicting their family standing on the terrace with the sun shining above. "Look, Mama! Look, Papa!" she exclaimed. Laura knelt, taking the drawing and studying it. Tears filled her eyes. "It's perfect," she whispered, "just like this moment." Richard bent down beside her, placing a hand over hers. "We made it," he said quietly, "through fear, through doubt. We made it." Sophie hugged them both tightly, and for the first time the word family felt complete. Later that day, Laura opened a small wooden box she had kept hidden for years. Inside were letters and photographs from the life she had shared with David, the children's father. She hesitated, then began to read aloud, sharing memories with Richard she had long kept private. "He always wanted us to be strong," she said, tears falling gently onto the photographs. "He believed in love, even when life was hard, and now we carry that with us." Richard reached for her hand, intertwining their fingers. "We carry it together. Every memory, every lesson, every moment of courage, it's ours now, and it guides the family we are becoming." That evening, the penthouse was filled with music. Laura picked up her guitar and began to play, softly at first, then with growing confidence. The children gathered around, singing along with her. Richard listened, sitting quietly in the corner, feeling the notes wrap around him like a warm embrace. It was a melody of home, of healing, of the life they had fought to claim. It was imperfect, tender, and beautiful, just like them. As night fell, the family gathered on the balcony, the city lights twinkling like stars below. Sophie leaned against Laura, Ethan and Noah rested against Richard, and together they gazed out at the world. "Do you think we'll always be happy?" Sophie asked, her voice soft. Richard looked down at her, smiling. "Happiness isn't about never facing storms. It's about holding each other through them. As long as we stay together, we'll find joy, even after the darkest nights." Laura squeezed his hand, feeling the truth of his words. "We've learned that, and it's more than enough." Richard turned to the skyline, then back at his family. He realized that the life he had once chased, wealth, power, recognition, had been empty without them, and the small, fragile moments of connection, courage, and love were worth far more than all the skyscrapers and boardrooms in the world. He bent down to whisper in Laura's ear, "The greatest gift isn't wealth or success or status. It's this. You, them, us. The life we've built together." Laura rested her head against his shoulder, and the children nestled close. The city hummed quietly around them, a backdrop to the truth they had discovered, that family, love, and hope are the treasures that endure. Life is fragile, full of unexpected twists, heartbreaks, and losses. Yet it is also resilient, capable of renewal, and abundant in love. True success is not measured in wealth or accolades, but in the courage to face fear, the willingness to embrace love, and the power to create a home where hearts are safe. Every moment is a gift, every bond a treasure, and every day an opportunity to choose hope over despair. As they stood together, bathed in the soft glow of the city lights, Richard, Laura, and their children understood the most important lesson of all. The gift of tomorrow is built today, in love, courage, and the unwavering belief that family is forever.